In this video, we're going to take a look at one of the logical functions in Excel 2019. We're going to look at the AND function. The word AND means both, and if you're talking about two logical tests, if you're talking about more than two, it means all. And the if function requires a logical value. And one of the ways to get a logical value is by using the AND function. So we're going to take a look here at how to use the AND function. What we've got here is we're on the gradebook AND worksheet, and we've got the names of some students, we've got some homework scores, we've got some test scores, we've got a minimum to pass the homework, we've got a minimum to pass the test, and the rule is that the student passes if they pass both the homework and the test. So we're going to look at each student's score here, and we're going to compare it with the minimum up here. And if it's greater than or equal to the minimum, then they pass the homework. We're going to do the same thing with the test. If their score is greater than or equal to the minimum test score, then they pass the test. If both of those things are true, then they pass the class. And we're going to compute a grade to put in here. Before we do that, though, we're going to put some logical tests over here at the side. You don't have to do it this way, but when you're first starting out, I think it's easier if you just kind of break it down into small pieces and then put the pieces together at the end. So I want to know if they pass the homework. Well, a student passes the homework if their homework score is greater than or equal to the minimum homework score. So for George here, and that's just a simple logical test. We don't need an if or an and or any kind of function at all. We just need a logical test. A logical test is something that returns true or false, and it's usually done by comparing two values. So I want to know if George's homework score, which is B5, is greater than or equal to the minimum required to pass up here in B2. Now, when I copy this formula, the B2 is not going to change. The B5 should become B6, B7, B8, and so on, but the B2 is not going to change. So I'm going to press function key F4 and put my dollar signs in. You can also type the dollar signs in if you want to. Okay, and I'm going to hit enter, and I get a value of true because George did pass the test. This is greater than or equal to 70. And then I'm just going to go down here. I'm going to get my fill handle down here, and I'm going to click and drag it all the way down, and it looks like we had a few people that did not pass the homework. This row right here is a value of false, this row is false, and this row is false. And if I look at all three of those numbers, all of those are less than 70. Okay. Now over here we're going to put a logical test that determines if they pass the test or not, and the logical test for that is check to see if their test score, which is C5, is greater than or equal to the minimum test score up here in C2. And again, that's an absolute cell reference for the C2. It's not changing. It's not going to move when I copy the formula. So I'm going to hit F4 and put the dollar signs in and then hit enter. Then I'm going to go to the lower right hand corner here and double click, and it will copy the formula down the page. It looks like only one person failed the test, and if we look at the test scores over here, we see that's correct. Now, the deal is they have to pass both. So I want to put a function over here that will tell me if both of these logical tests over here are true. And whenever you see the word both, or you see the word all, or you see the word and, it means that we're probably going to be using the AND function. So that's going to be on my formulas tab up here. And it is a logical function. And it is the very first one alphabetically. So this dialog box comes up for the function arguments for AND. And you see here it just wants a logical test. Well, my first logical test, and a logical test is just true or false. So logical test is this right here. I'm on the row for George, so I'm going to look at George's two scores, or two logical tests here. So I want to know if G5 is true, and then click or tab down into logical 2, and then I want to know if H5 is true, and over here you'll see the actual value of those two cells. So this is true, and then either down here or down here, you'll also see the formula result and see what the result of the AND is. And if everything is true up here, then I'm going to see it true down here for the formula result. Notice also that when I typed a value into logical test number 2 here, logical 3 opened up for me. And when I click down there, logical 4 opens up. When I click down there, logical 5 opens up, and then I get a little scroll bar over here. And you can have as many as 255 logical tests in an AND function. The only way the AND function returns a value of true is if every single one of the arguments that's passed in is true. In real life, if you are using the AND function, there probably are not going to be too many times where you need more than 3 or 4 logical tests. If you ever need more than that, it might be an indication that you haven't thought through the problem very well and maybe need to go back and look at it, because you really don't need more than a few very often at all. Okay, so I don't have anything here. That's fine. I've got 2 logical tests here. They're both true. Click on OK. And if you look at my formula now, if I just double click in that cell, it says AND G5 and H5. And any place where both of these are true, like on this row, and this row, and this row, and this row, I should get the value true. Okay, so let's just go here and let's just double click. And we should have had 4 people passing, and every place where I've got all trues in columns G and H, I'm going to get the value true in column I. Okay, so the AND function is doing what it's supposed to do. Now, what we want to know, though, is we want a letter grade. We don't want true or false. We want a letter grade. Okay. If you put a logical test in a cell, like we did here, and like we did here, or a function that returns a logical value, like we did here, you always get true or false. I don't want true or false, though, for the grade. I want to look at what's in column I and use that to determine whether to put a P or an F in column D. Okay, so that means I got to use the if function. So let's go to George here. Make sure you're in D5 before you start this. And let's go to logical, and let's choose if. And my logical test is over here in column I. So for George, I'm on row 5, so I want I5. And if that is true, it means the student passed the test. I'm going to put a capital P in there, and tab down, I'm going to put a capital F in there if it's false. And notice that Excel puts the quotation marks around the letter P and the letter F. Those are required. If I try to put them in without the P or the F, as I tried in a previous video, I will get an error message. So it puts them in for you if you use the function arguments dialog box. If you don't use the function arguments dialog box and just type out the formula from scratch, then you have to remember to put the quotation marks in. Okay, so that's my formula. Let's click on OK, and let's double click here and take a look at our formula. And it says if I5, which is this cell, and then put a P, otherwise put an F. And George has the value true over here, so George passed. Let's go to get our fill handle here, and let's double click and copy that all the way down. And wherever there's a false over here, we should see a corresponding F over here, and everything is working just fine. Okay, so we needed to look at this logical test, we need to look at this logical test, and we need to look at both of them, which is what the AND function is for, and then we had to use the if function to figure out the letter grade. So it's fine if you do it that way. If you need extra columns over here on the right to compute intermediate values, that's fine. If that makes it easier, go ahead and do it. Now, if you're creating a spreadsheet for somebody else and this stuff is just kind of cluttering things up, you don't want them to worry about this stuff that's over here because it's really kind of irrelevant. It's obviously relevant to the formula in column D, but otherwise not really. So they don't need to see this. So we can go here and we can right click and we can hide those 3 columns. And you see there's a little bar there. Instead of just a single line, there's 2 of them indicating that there's some missing columns. And the other way you can tell there's some missing columns is, the letter J does not come right after the letter F. So we're obviously missing some columns there. So I can do that. Now that stuff is hidden, and the user of this spreadsheet can just focus on the data that's over here in the first 4 columns. Okay. Now, we could have just done this whole thing from scratch. Okay, if you want to do the whole thing from scratch, you can just start out. Let's just hit delete here and delete everything that's in the cell. Okay, and I could just write the if function from scratch. I'm going to do equals if, and then I need the logical test. Okay, and the logical test is computed by using the AND function. So the logical test is the AND function, and then I've got to pass in 2 arguments to the AND function. My first argument is going to be is B5 greater than or equal to $B $2. Okay, and if that's true, then he passed the homework. And then a comma, that's my first logical test. And now you see it's highlighting logical too. So my second logical test is going to be is C5 greater than or equal to $C $2. Okay, and then close that, and that closes off the AND function. And so the AND function is my logical test, which is what it was before, except instead of putting it in a separate cell, I'm building it into the if function right now. So that's my logical test. Then I do a comma. Now it wants to know the value of true. Well, the value of true is going to be p, and you got to put quotation marks. And the value of false is going to be f, and you need to put quotation marks around that as well. And then close your parentheses. And if you're on the last one, the parenthesis will be black. So that's how you know you get your parentheses balanced. And then go ahead and hit enter. And George's grade doesn't change. We're computing things exactly like we did before. And these grades are not going to change either. I just copied them down. But now we are not depending on the stuff over here. So I'm going to right click and I'm going to unhide these columns. And then I'm just going to go over here. I'm going to select those columns. I'm going to hit delete. So now that I've deleted them, those columns were not necessary anymore because of the way that I rewrote the if function. And you can do it this way if you want to. After you've gotten used to the if function, the and function, that's probably the way you'll choose to do it. But if you're just starting out using those functions, you might want to use those intermediate columns like we did in the first place. So if you have two things here like we had one in column G and one in column H, and you want both of them to be true, use the AND function. If we had 3 things or 4 things or 5 things, we would just have to set up logical tests for each one of those 3 or 4 or 5 things, and then use the AND function to make sure that all of them were true. And that's the way the AND function works.